Welcome to United We Spay, the show dedicated to promoting affordable spay-neuter services nationwide. Each episode delves into the heart of the movement, sharing inspiring stories and driving positive change. Our goal is to raise awareness, educate, and empower, addressing overpopulation's root causes to ensure every animal has a chance for a better life. Hosted by Stacy LeBaron and the United Spay Alliance team, we're on a mission to change lives. Fed up with the fixation on symptoms in the animal welfare conversation, it's time to change the narrative. Join us on United We Spay, where we make a difference by spreading knowledge and building a compassionate world for animals. Let's put prevention first and spotlight spay-neuter in the animal welfare space.
You're listening to United We Spay, a podcast from United Spay Alliance. United Spay Alliance works to promote accessible, affordable, and timely spay-neuter services because an ounce of prevention today can prevent untold suffering tomorrow. Spay-neuter, it's public health for pets. I'm Stacy LeBaron, United Spay Alliance board member and host of the show. And today on United We Spay, we are talking to JJ Hendrickson. JJ was the Chief Animal Control Officer for the Kenai Animal Shelter in Kenai, Alaska. She managed the daily operations and logistics of the shelter. She maintained professional relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement, multiple veterinary hospitals, nonprofit organizations, local 4-H program, vendors, City of Kenai employees, volunteers, community members, and staff within other municipal shelters throughout the state of Alaska. JJ ensured the shelter operated in a humane and safe manner consistent to the mission and objectives outlined by the City of Kenai National Animal Care and Control Standards, Kenai Municipal Code Title III for both human and animal populations while at the shelter. She was responsible for ensuring all adopted animals were fixed prior to leaving the shelter to start their new lives. Hi, JJ. Thanks so much for being on the show. And to get started, tell us, why are you so passionate about spay-neuter? Is there a single story or animal that stands out to you?
I can't say there's a single story or animal per se. I think it's just over, my time at the shelter, just seeing how many animals are coming through the door, in a yearly basis, and how important it is to kind of keep that population under control. And really the only way to do that is through spay and neuter.
I mean, it's music to our ears to read that you're ensuring every animal that got adopted was already spayed and neutered before adoption. And I know that's been a bit of a hot topic over the last couple of years with access to care. And Alaska, that's a challenging place to get access to spay-neuter resources. How important was it to you to ensure that that was happening up there?
It was very important. When I first started as the chief, our policy basically, where people could pay for a spay neuter, and then they would use that voucher to go get the animal fixed. Sometimes it paid for all of it, and sometimes it paid for just a portion of it. But as I had started, the previous chief had started to round up some information and was realizing that a good 60 to 75% of the animals that were going out were not actually getting fixed. And she was seeing those coupons just sitting there. And this is money that people had paid that if they didn't use would get lost. And so it's one of those things that if you can imagine paying for something and just never getting it done. And so right as I was starting, or right before I started, the chief, one of the things that she looked at was making sure that all the animals were fixed before they left. And, I'm really fortunate that, our upper management was on board with that, and our city council, and we were able to make sure that all adopted animals from the shelter, were fixed before they left, so that we weren't receiving the puppies and the kittens of animals that had been adopted out, to us previously.
So in the period of time that you were up in Alaska, and you currently are not in Alaska, so we're talking about sort of your past experience up there, with that program and any other spay-neuter initiatives that you had in place, did you see a decrease in intakes into the shelter?
For quite a while, yes. I think it had to do with the fact that a lot of our local rescues as well adapted if they were adopting an animal out, they were getting them fixed. So I would say pre-COVID, things changed within that, and there's plenty of reasons for that. But With that being said, prior to COVID hitting, yes, we were seeing a decrease, in animals coming into the shelters because we were getting them all fixed, and then the local rescues were also getting all their animals fixed. So when you were getting animals from the area, from a reputable, organization, and not just kind of unfortunately some of the people who breed, backyard and whatnot, they were getting fixed. So right there, that's a huge impact of the population of animals. Obviously, COVID hit, and just like every other shelter around the world, you're seeing, animals numbers increase. And, looking at some of the data, some of that is because for that period of time, obviously, with the resources going to humans, vets weren't able to fix animals. So there were some litters that happened that even owners didn't mean for them to happen, but they could not get fixed when the resources, rightfully so, should have gone to humans. And then even once things restarted, there's a vet shortage. And so we lost quite a few vets, and so not only did you not have the resources, but there were no vets to do it. And then once the vet clinics did open again, because there were less vets, appointments took longer. And so, even somebody who was trying their best, sometimes I know a lot of people are like, oh, accidents never happen, but they do. And so you have, that population too. So after COVID, I know I can say we did see, an increase again, but I feel like it will continue to go back down. We've just got to get everybody on board to help get those animals fixed.
So you just made an interesting statement about how, we lost so many veterinarians during COVID. In your opinion, what's unique to that versus did you lose a lot of animal control officers in that period of time? Did you lose a lot of shelter staff? I mean, what do you think was unique to the veterinarians leaving practice?
I will say I don't have a good answer for that. I do have some friends who are vets, some of which just, after COVID, they were at that age where they could retire, and some retired, and others had, reasons of their own that they did leave. I'd say in the animal control world, I can say we did lose some animal control officers during that time as well. And I think everybody has their own story to tell as to, why something like that would happen. But it did impact, in my opinion, the numbers of animals coming into shelters, and I know right now we're still even in Alaska trying to fill some animal control officer positions. And, we need people who are passionate about spay and neuter, who are passionate about animals. And the other thing that I don't think people realize is in the animal control world, when you start, everybody's like, I do it for my love of animals. And that's great, but you have to love people too, because the majority of your job is going to be talking to individuals. And if you can't communicate in a proper way with them, your love for animals isn't going to translate in the way it needs to. So we need more people in both the veterinary field and the animal control field.
So let's talk a little bit about life as an animal control officer in Alaska. What is that like? All I can think of is it's cold out there, but you share with me, what is life like for an animal control officer out on the streets?
Yeah, I think that if you talk to, different animal control officers in Alaska, you'll hear different stories. For example, if you talk to the Valdez animal control officers, they actually deal with bears. I'm very fortunate that our area, we do not. But, it's going to be a little bit different. Some of my fun stories that I have, I've gotten to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and a couple different other organizations like the Seward Sea Life Center. And, I've helped with an otter at one time, and I've helped with an eagle. And, as cool as those stories are, I can tell you they are definitely not the majority. The majority is just our normal dogs and cats and, just really interacting with the public. I can tell you that my own stance is always education. So I was one who would always like to educate general public before any citations or anything like that happened. You get used to the cold, you get used to the dark. I get used to going into work and it was dark when I went in. And by the time I left work, it was dark when I left. So with a few hours of light in between. So, you just know to dress properly for the environment and, make sure that you have all the gear that you need to be safe while you're in the field, whether it's from individuals, from animals, or from the climate itself.
Have there been any programs in Alaska that have really focused on spay neuter? Any of the large, big fix events or any spay neuter initiatives that happened during your tenure up there?
I know that in Anchorage, so I was in Kenai, a smaller town and more rural of an environment. I know Anchorage does have the like ASPCA type spay neuter atmosphere where they can do that. I know some of the local rescues have worked with some of our vets and done, weekend clinics. And I know even recently there was an organization which I unfortunately has left my brain as to what the name of it is, but they came down and they did some free spay neuters. And I think they did a 2-day event, and that was fabulous. They said it was completely booked out. And so there have been some initiatives. And even in our local area, we have the Peninsula Spay Neuter Fund. And then one of our local rescues, KPAL, they offer vouchers to help go towards the spay neuter fund. And what they'll do is you pay for a portion of getting your animal fixed, and then they cover a portion of it through like a coupon that they send to the vet. So, even within our local area, it's something that isn't maybe a spay neuter day, but it assists people who maybe can't afford it to go into the vet to get that animal fixed. And the cool thing about that, in my opinion, is that the way it's set up, you get to utilize a local vet. So not only are you utilizing a vet that you can later go to if your animal has an issue, you're establishing that relationship and a vet who knows your animal. So I love large spay days, but I also really like the fact that you are establishing yourself at a vet who will now know your animal for the future.
We've heard a lot of conversation with regards to spaying and neutering in rural areas, that is a much more challenging situation than in the urban areas in all of our states. Do you agree with that statement coming from a more rural area?
Oh, I definitely agree with that area. I can tell you that back in the day, I used to actually work in Ohio, and I worked at a local vet clinic, and it was great. The vet that I worked with was Dr. G. She's amazing. She does lots of large scale spay neutering, and she's got, the rascal unit, and just seeing how many animals that she can get on a daily basis. It's amazing in what she can do. Unfortunately, we don't have those same resources where we have, the vehicles that can come and, sit in front of the shelter and do, a spay neuter day. And I think some of it is just the resources to get up there to be able to do it. And even, spay neuter in itself is pretty expensive. So it's definitely harder in Alaska than I think it is in some of the, lower 48 states.
Are there any differences with regards to how the community is approaching getting dogs spayed and neutered versus cats? Are there any differences, or the challenges are still the same?
I think the challenges are still the same. I mean, I think either way, dog or cat, it's still going to be expensive, when you're trying to do it yourself versus utilizing one of the coupons that I kind of talked about, or going up to like Anchorage, or, waiting for a spay neuter day. I think the biggest difference is that it's cheaper to obviously fix a male than it is a female. So I think some people do take that into consideration, and sometimes, they will adopt, or if they're, not getting from a shelter or something like that, they at times will pick a male over a female just because of the price difference.
And when you were an animal control officer in Alaska, how did you handle community cats?
Ooh, community cats. So in Alaska, based on kind of state statutes and everything, you're not supposed to have community cats. As you can imagine, it's Alaska, and Alaska has a lot of protected birds federally. And so it's a really difficult conversation to have, I'll be honest, just because we do have organizations who would love to have them and are working towards that. But right now, at least when I left, there was not really any laws in place to allow that to happen.
But people are allowed to let their cats outside.
It depends on what area you're in. Some areas do have stricter regulations or municipal codes for them. I can tell you in the area I was in, you could allow your cats to be outside, but I do know of other municipalities within the state that do have stricter rules regarding cats being outside and whether they have to be within like catios or things like that if they are. So there are some regulations. It just really depends on where you live in Alaska. And then other things to consider is the temperature. I mean, if you're looking at some place, Fairbanks or, some of the places that are as cold as they are, it's not always advantageous to have your kitties outside during certain times of the year. So I would say, with Alaska being as big as it is, it's really dependent upon where you reside in Alaska.
Right. Well, and also then an understanding of the cats that are owned, to ensure that they're being kept indoors. But then if they're not spayed or neutered, who wants an indoor cat that's not spayed or neutered? I certainly don't. So it's even more reason to have access to care and access to spay neuter services there. So you said that there was a high volume clinic in Anchorage. And anywhere else in the state that you know of with like a high volume clinic, or is it pretty much focused in that area?
I think it's pretty much focused in Anchorage. One of the things about our state is Anchorage is kind of the hub for like our main airport and things like that. And just transportation and getting to Anchorage seems to be kind of the central location for a lot of different things. I know even as the president of the Alaska Animal Control Association, it was just always easier to host our conferences in Anchorage. We would end up with more organizations who were able to participate because in order to get to some places, you go to Anchorage first, and then you would take like the jumper plane to get anywhere else. So yeah, Anchorage is the one that I know of. But again, there could be others.
So obviously you've networked with, the animal control all across the state in Alaska. How much of your time or of an animal control officer's time is spent sort of triaging spay-neuter situations? So, trying to work with either the public or working with municipal officials, trying to advocate for more spay-neuter. Is it, a hot topic with animal control, or is it just we have no control, so therefore we're going to just hand out names and numbers and hope for the best for people?
I think that one's, again, it's based on your location and where you are. Some organizations and some locations have easier access to, the vets. I can tell you, for example, Seward, Alaska, there at one point was only one vet in that area. We were fortunate that we have, 4 or 5 vets within our area. So, we're a fortunate area for that. But, you also have some of your villages that have no vets. And so getting, somebody out there to fix an animal, or, does that look like them, putting that animal on a plane, getting it to Anchorage or to another surrounding area, getting it fixed and getting the animal back. So it's really dependent upon where you are and what your codes and what way your organization is set up will determine how much time you're able to spend. But I can tell you, in a general basis, anytime we'd go to a school or any kind of event, one of the things we always try to focus on is, hey, animal safety, making sure your animals have, city license. So we were in an area that required it. And the great thing about that is that meant that the animals got to come home a lot faster because of those microchips, and then always spay and neuter. So those are kind of the big topics when we went to schools that we would talk about. And again, depending upon the age of the kids you're, talking with, you might have to change how you're mentioning it. But at the same time, if you put it in their heads, they're the kids that take it back home to mom and dad, and that might be the way mom and dad hear about it and then decide to get their animals fixed if they aren't.
You just had an incredible statement there talking about cats and dogs going on a plane to fly to go get spayed and neutered and then brought back home. We see all the advertisements, the promotions about rescuing animals on airplanes, and they're flying from the south up to the northern shelters, here in the lower 48 or whatever. And it's fascinating to think of transporting animals around to get to a spay neuter, the opposite of a desert, getting into a spay neuter area that there is capacity. And I think that's a brilliant idea. I think we got to do what we got to do in order to get these cats and dogs spayed or neutered. So transport may play a role in spay neuter now.
Yeah, it in Alaska specifically, there's probably other states as well, but, with Alaska being as vast as it is, you have certain villages that the only way you're getting in and out is by boat, by plane, or, depending if it's a certain time of year, you might even be able to do, a snow machine. But if that's the way you get your animal to the vet, that's the way you get your animal to the vet. And, people do. Unfortunately, it's hard for some because that is a financial commitment. Spaying and neutering itself is expensive, but as you can imagine, getting an animal with limited transportation, it's even harder. So transportation is a big issue in Alaska.
Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about the mental health and well-being of animal control officers, Alaska and across the board. I would assume you've probably attended some national conferences too. What's the mental health like for the profession of animal care and control officers?
One of my favorite conferences that I went to talked about compassion fatigue and how important it is to understand that in the animal control field, you are giving so much compassion to animals, to humans, that in a lot of ways, to dumb it down in a way, you are giving out so much of your compassion that you aren't leaving your own tank full for your own self. And so understanding that you have to have alternative ways to help your mental health is important. For me, I love reading and spending time with my family. And for me, those are ways that I can kind of recover my limit of compassion when I'm home and, have my snuggles from my kiddos or, my husband, and or I'm sitting and having a nice coffee with a great book. I mean, I think one of the things when it comes to animal control officers, we get so invested in the animals. I can tell you, I mean, as the chief of an organization, when I'd go home, my brain was never not thinking about how am I going to get that animal out? That one has been with us for 30 days or whatever it is. How can I, spread the word about this animal so that it gets adopted? Or, oh, we just had a power outage. I need to, run to the shelter to see if our power's on there, or just whatever it is. Your brain is consistently thinking about, those animals. And so having ways to separate yourself from the field itself is very, very important. I know there are a lot of animal control officers who will start rescue organizations and things like that. And one of the things that in the classes I've taken, they say that you are in the similar field, even though it's a different thing that you're doing, and you're not giving your brain and your heart a break. And so, you really, really have to. I can tell you my staff will tell you that after I learned about it, I was a huge advocate to making sure that my staff had compassion fatigue training and just letting them know how important it is to have those separations. And, I love people to start other things, but maybe finding ways to start other things that are not necessarily involved in the same field are very, very important. And, if I could say one thing today, I would say, besides from how important it is to spay or neuter, mental health and compassion fatigue are things that, as animal control officers or people in the animal field in any way, really needs to, make sure their mental health is proper and where it needs to be, because you can't help somebody else if you're not doing well yourself.
Right, right. And it's a marathon for sure. If you want to be in this business for a long time, it's a marathon. And one little tip I'll share is when I used to come home from the adoption center after working there, I had like a tradition of things I would do in order to sort of cross over into the threshold of, my life as a mom and wife and family member. And so that then I would move into that other space. And I tried not to litter it with too many foster cats, because if I had foster cats at home and I had cats I was worrying about at the shelter or at the adoption center, it was going to be, too overwhelming mentally. But, definitely doing things where your brain turns off and is not thinking about work and life and that kind of thing. So I definitely agree with you with regards to that statement, and that people should look out for themselves. And I also feel like, obviously on the vacations, people should take a break on the vacations and not say, oh, well, if you need me, call me. And I mean, I'm the worst offender of that still, but it's one of those things where I think when you're hands-on, very hands-on, right out there in the community, and you're dealing with a lot of emotional energy, and you have to be this sponge that you're either a sponge or you're Teflon, however you want to choose it. You either reverberate it out so it doesn't impact you, or you absorb it, you detox, and then you recover afterwards. And we're different types of personalities out there, but we have to be very understanding and listening to people. And we may not agree with them. So we have to create this system of being able to work it through. And some people do it quickly and some people need to take some time. And so we have to be respectful for people for, how they process also, because I process totally different than you process probably. And we need to be respectful of that and understanding of that. And you're nodding your head in our conversation here, so I bet you've seen that too.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I also agree that you mentioned a valid point, like take your vacations. I think that there's so many times where people are worried that, things won't continue if they're gone. And yes, there might be a void because you are a person that, is needed and valued, but things will continue to happen. And you need your vacation time. It's important.
Yep, exactly. If you could have like one thing that folks would take away from our conversation today, what would that be?
I think I'm going to reiterate the two I just mentioned. I think that, compassion fatigue and understanding what compassion fatigue is and how to be healthy mentally for your own self so that you could, help the animals and the humans that within, your area. It's super important. And just spaying and neutering is super important. I think that Sometimes it gets overlooked. There's so many commercials, and sometimes I think our brains hear it to the point where we kind of shut off that, oh, I hear it all the time, whatever. But it still is. And I think it will continue to be important no matter what year, we're in. Animals need to be fixed. Otherwise, at some point, we're going to hit a population where we do not have the houses to sustain that population. And I don't know what that would look like, and I don't want to ever see it. And I think the way to prevent it is to have people get their animals fixed.
And if folks are interested in getting in touch with JJ, they can reach out to us at the United Spay Alliance, and we'll make sure we get messages out through to JJ. I have one last follow-up question for you as we close out today, which is, if there are any folks out there that are interested in becoming an animal control officer, what would you recommend that they do?
Oh, that is a very good question. I think that do your research. I think that, a lot of people, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, go into the field and they're like, I love animals. I'm not going to have to interact with people. And that is so far from the truth of what we do that, there are people who leave the field pretty early on because of, the interactions. So I think do your research and make sure that it's something that you really want to do, not just for the animal's sake. In the end of the day, yes, you are helping animal populations, but you really need to understand that you are a community member and you are out there to help the community. And you help the community, by making sure the animals are fixed, by making sure that the animals are contained in the areas they're supposed to be contained so nobody's hurt. And, making sure that you're educating the public so that the kids are safe and they have happy lives with their animals. So yeah, do your research first and foremost, and then, give it a try. You can, prior to, applying, you can volunteer at your local animal shelter. Just about every shelter probably has some kind of volunteer program. And don't hesitate to go in and talk to an animal control officer. We will tell you all about the job. We love talking about it. It is a unique field in so many ways. Even when you look at other animal jobs, it's so different, and it's different in every state that you're in. So if you want to do it, talk to an animal control officer in the state, an area you want to go to, and that'll give you a really good indication of what that job is.
And each individual state trains their animal control officers?
Yes and no. Again, when it comes to animal control, one of the cool things is there's the National Animal Control Association, there's Code 3, there's some really great trainings out there. I know that different states are working on making it where there's a similar training for each state. But right now, there's different state trainings, there's different city and municipal trainings. So it really is dependent upon where you work. But the National Animal Control Association and Code 3, they are great organizations. I've been trained through both of them, and I have loved every moment of the training. I love getting the opportunities to interact with other animal control officers and kind of hear their stories and their successes and their failures, and share, what I would say are mine as well. That hands-on training is great. And, the cool thing about it is that training makes sure that you are prepared to go into the field and you're not going to get hurt. And that, at the end of the day, is kind of one of the most important things. You want to be able to help your populations, and you want to go home with all the fingers and the toes that you came in with.
Excellent. Well, JJ, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. If you like this episode, be sure to share and subscribe. We release a new episode every month, digging into important conversations surrounding spay-neuter throughout the U.S. and around the world. For more resources for spay-neuter and to learn more about our work at unitedspayalliance.org. That's United, S-P-A-Y, Alliance.org. To get in touch with us at any time, feel free to email info@unitedspayalliance.org. Thanks so much, and until next time.